Well, good evening everyone. My name's Doug Chipman. I'm Mayor of the City of Clarence, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this special council meeting tonight. Could I ask those present in the chamber to join me in prayer, the council prayer? Please stand. Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this council. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the City of Clarence. Amen. Amen. And I acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on tonight. Pay our respects to elders past and present, and also recognise the continuing spiritual connection that the Tasmanian Aboriginal people have with the land. Thank you. I'd like to welcome those members of the public that are able to join us in person this evening. COVID-19 restrictions are still such that only a maximum of 12 people can join us by prior booking in the chamber, so welcome. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, and what is said in this meeting is not protected by privilege. The link and the agenda papers are available on Council's website. Tonight we are sitting as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. We have 4 deputations, and each presenter will be invited to take questions from Alderman after their presentation. I do need to remind speakers that they have only 3 minutes for their presentation, and that there will be a warning tone with 30 seconds to go to give you the opportunity to wrap up. There are no apologies. We have all aldermen present. Are there any declarations of interest, please? Thank you. In that case, I'll ask the General Manager to invite the speakers forward.
Thank you, Mayor. Could I invite Mr Jeff Curry from Mornington to please step forward and provide your deputation. Thank you.
Mayor and Alderman, thank you for the opportunity to address this meeting. My primary concern is the ongoing health and viability of Milford Forest that supports 3 EPBC, that's the Environmental Protection, Biodiversity and Conservation Act listed orchid species. I acknowledge the highway upgrade will go ahead in its current form. It probably isn't the most cost-effective solution or the best environmental solution, but is what we have to work with. So you have the opportunity to make a decision tonight to achieve the best outcome from a bad situation. The planning response in the DA states the proposed accessible works are not located within the biodiversity protection area overlay on the list map. This is because the biodiversity protection area overlay is incomplete and none of the Milford Forest biodiversity values are shown in the overlay, despite being recorded in several other overlays in list map. Clearly you cannot approve the DA knowing the information used to assess it is wrong. Clarence Bushland and Conservation Strategy states its aims as healthy landscapes, healthy communities, and the key role of Clarence Council are to partner with key land custodians in seeking to prevent biodiversity loss. The ongoing preservation of Milford Forest biodiversity is reliant on Milford property continuing to be an economically viable enterprise so the Lewis family can continue to manage the forest for conservation. This is particularly important on a national and indeed global level, as the sag spider orchid and Milford leek orchid grow nowhere else on earth. The issue of suitable road access to the property is vital for the 5 businesses that currently operate from there and any future ventures that may be considered. As a tourism business operator and tour guide, I know well the tourism opportunities Milford offers, as it has heritage values, cultural values for our First Nations people and natural tourism opportunities because of its close proximity to Hobart and its biodiversity. Specialist tourist opportunities include and are not limited to botanical tours focusing on orchids and the old growth forest, birding tours as the forest is a known haven for nesting birds, including 3 wedge-tailed eagles who use Milford as part of their range, a number of species who nest in the hollow trees and shorebirds along the Pittwater foreshore. None of these opportunities are viable without safe, easy and convenient access that isn't covered in the DA. I would not feel entering the highway with a bus full of tourists via the left-in, left-out proposal in the current DA would be safe, so you must reject the DA in its current form and have an alternative, safer access from Pittwater Road included in a revised DA. Throughout the planning response, there is considerable mention of relocation of infrequently used Taswater access from Tasman Highway to Pittwater Road, but little mention of an alternative safe access to the Milford property to continue to undertake its current and future business enterprises. So again, I feel you must reject the DA in its current form.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Are you happy to take questions from the Alderman?
Absolutely.
Okay. The floor is open for questions if any Aldermen have questions. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is in relation to the proximity of these orchids within the boundary or the relocated boundary that's been proposed by the Department of State Growth. Are there any within that boundary, or are the most endangered of the orchids outside that realignment of the boundary?
They're outside the realignment of the boundary. The closest known orchid is 15 metres from the centre line of the highway, the new highway, which isn't very far.
Thank you.
Other questions? Alderman Mulder.
Yes, thank you for that deputation. I've just got a question which is probably a little related, similar to Alderman James, and the question relates to, have you any idea of moving this highway in this direction, what percentage of the habitat, both flora and fauna, is impacted?
It's a small percentage of the habitat, but it's a continual encroaching on the area these orchids grow in. They're not a plant that you can dig up and put in a pot at home. They rely entirely on a symbiotic relationship between the old growth forest and microscopic fungi that grows in the soil. These are not things you can just pick up and move. They need the whole intact habitat, and by every little piece that we take out of it, we're endangering that habitat.
All right. Mr. Curry, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Microphone, please.
Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor and Alderman. I also acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. We must remember they are also the traditional custodians of the land we are discussing, and it's time we took these land custodial duties seriously. I am the current custodian of the working farm Milford, which houses 5 businesses plus Milford Forest, 40 hectares in size, which is unique in its species and biodiversity, not only in Clarence but in the world. These have been protected by the Lewis family since 1829 at our own cost, and it is my responsibility to see this continues. I acknowledge that the road upgrade is important, but my big concern is that it needs to be implemented properly. I'd like you all to picture a better outcome for all stakeholders. Imagine that the threatened habitat has been carefully managed during the construction phase to minimise disturbance and future adverse impacts, that the critically endangered orchids, other rare plants and threatened fauna, including wedge-tailed eagles and Tasmanian devils, continue to thrive, that Milford Forest remains an attractive, important eastern gateway to Clarence. Milford Farm, which is the 8th oldest family business in Australia, remains sustainable and is thus able to fund the management of this forest. This is especially important because if Milford as a working farm is cut off from Hobart and its viability compromised as per the current DA, the ongoing costs and fate of the listed habitat will ultimately fall onto government. Imagine also the natural and cultural heritage of Milford is preserved and becomes an attraction, plans for which are underway already with Hobart Airport and with the Indigenous community, which is good PR and a win for Clarence's economy. And the project is an inspiration to the community and to tourists, not just seen as another government project trashing something. Now, I believe this is easily achievable now, but not if the DA is passed as is. I thank Council for proposing a construction management plan, but I believe it needs to be detailed first, with timelines, measurable outcomes and independent monitoring. I offered to assist with this planning a year ago, and I offer to do so again. Alternative access to Milford needs to be included now. I strongly disagree that the proposal's accessible works are considered to not unduly restrict agricultural use on adjoining land. The proponent does not know what these uses are, having never asked me. So this is uninformed opinion, not fact, and cannot be the basis of approving the current DA. Alternative access plans are underway with Heritage Landscape consultant Susan Small, and these need to be included now. So I call on Clarence Council to choose a better future by insisting on an agreed, detailed construction management plan first, to remedy this current DA's lack of alternative access and compliant fire access, which also impacts on Hobart Airport, and to address other major deficiencies I've already outlined, and instead to approve an alternative which includes these. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are you happy to take questions?
Yes,
Mr. Lewis?
thank you, Mr Mayor.
Any questions? Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to understand where the boundary of your farming boundary fence is and where the natural attributes of the forest start. In other words, are there any grazing or is there any grazing permitted within a certain perimeter of the property, and is it basically used as part of a natural sort of environment free from any animals grazing therein?
Okay. I've sent round some photos which might help to partly explain that. The farm is 120 hectares, 40 of which is forest. The area of greatest concern is on the boundary of Pittwater Road, extending along to approximately where the Tas Networks power line goes through, about 8 or so hectares, which contains the 2 critically endangered orchids, which are found nowhere else in the world. They were found, one was found in the Sorell area, and unfortunately Sorell Council killed that, and the other one of one species is now under the tarmac of Hobart Airport. So we're looking at a total of a really critical area of 8 hectares, and it happens to be right on the corner and right on the highway. And as Jeff Curry pointed out, the nearest orchid inside is 15 metres away. But what is really concerning, the strip that they're taking isn't really a big area as a total proportion, but because the forest is very long and narrow, and because, as Jeff Curry pointed out, these orchids depend on the trees, they can't grow anywhere else unless they're actually attached to the tree roots, basically. Anything that takes out trees affects their habitat, and it also brings in the risk of desiccation through wind. Nobody understands the ecology of these things, but we do know in drought years they've been monitored by Dipipli and other people for 15 or 20 years, and anything that increases the temperature, changes the light regime, all that sort of stuff will impact on these. And that's why it's critical to manage the forest, not just the orchids. It's you know, you can't separate the two. So the total area, to answer the previous question, isn't huge, but it's because it's a long, narrow strip, it's going to cause what's called edge effects, and that will encroach on those. And it also affects other species. It's not just the orchids. There are Tasmanian devils in there are quolls. You know, it's a very, very rich habitat. It's probably the most biodiverse habitat in the whole of Clarence. And on a world scale, it's actually important. I mean, we have filmmakers coming from Sweden to film these things, and you know, it's a hidden gem of Clarence, and because it's also right near the airport. I mean, I've been in discussions with the airport for quite a while about developing the region, our sort of mini 5 Mile Beach region, as an attraction in itself, and they're very, very keen to have tourists and people come over and look at it in a controlled way. But that is all predicated on it not degrading over time, and I think we can manage this well, but we've just got to make sure that it's not degraded. And what really concerns me is that we were told by the proponent that the new fence line, which we've all looked at, that would be the boundary. They would put up temporary fencing, and when we got the DA on Thursday, Well, actually, it was Thursday anyway. When we got it very recently, we found out that there's another 5 metre incursion zone, which nobody had told us about. And it's all this what are they doing in the incursion zone? And all these things need, I think, to be spelt out and agreed first.
Yeah, that was my second question, Mr Mayor.
Sorry, I went on a bit there.
In relation to the excursion zone, does that basically, is that handed over to another agency to administer? Because when you're talking about an exclusion zone, that is within the property, is it not? Or
well, it's my land. I've got no idea what's going to happen. No one's told me about it. It hasn't been discussed. I've got no idea whether Hazel Brothers are going to drive bulldozers on it or not. I've got no idea. We have not been informed. There's been no discussion about it. As I said, I was previously told there'd be a temporary fence up, like up near the airport roundabout where they've got the grassland with a little, flag fence around it. But there's all sorts of issues of bringing in weed seeds on machines, of bringing in fungus. And all. I mean, we go up there and anyone who's visited, you treat your boots with fungicide. So how are they going to do that with bulldozers and things like that? But it's all this gradual encroachment. And who's going to supervise it? And what if someone decides to, let's just park my bulldozer here overnight and drives further in? I mean, I don't know what's going to happen because these things haven't been discussed or controlled. But that's where it is at the moment. Okay. So we're a bit in the dark there.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes. Would you be able to expand? You mentioned there's 5 different businesses, I think, activities that take place. Can you expand on those and tell us what they are?
Yes. Well, Milford as an enterprise is, as I said, the 8th oldest family business in Australia, and it started off with farming. The Clarence Plains, as you probably all know, was the wheat basket of the colonies and used to supply wheat to New South Wales, and that's where I think the Lewises made a lot of money. Then they invested in sheep, which went very well for 100-odd years. And it was until recently the home of the oldest South Downs stud in the world, which unfortunately when my husband passed away I had to move on, and they now live in Victoria. But it's still the Cambridge stud, but they're in Victoria. So now I have mixed sheep. I have a vineyard, a working vineyard, which is Milford Vineyard, which is the second oldest vineyard in the Coal River Valley. I have a joint venture with CSIRO growing Manuka, and we're just actually doing a trial this year to expand into sandalwood, because with global warming we're starting to look at trees and crops that will actually survive drought and higher temperatures. So there's sheep agistment, there's horse agistment, and I've also started with a company in Sydney recently looking at ecotourism type things, the sort of things that Jeff was alluding to. So that's in the business planning phase. And I also run an IT business as well in my spare time, which I don't have much of. So,
other questions? Mr Lewis, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Could I ask Justin Gott from Gorilla Bay Oysters to please come forward one time? Thank you.
Good evening all. Thank you for the opportunity to make some statements about Gorilla Bay Seafoods. I'd like to thank everybody for the opportunity and in relation to our road access issues. Gorilla Bay Seafoods has been in operation for over 40 years, and when we purchased the business 11 years ago, the access from the highway was a major drawcard for not only the oyster farm, but for the potential tourism opportunities, I should say. Over the last 11 years, we have weathered Pacific mortality oyster syndrome, which is POMS, and unfortunately for us, that was a 95% kill of all our oysters in 2 days. We've obviously, like most businesses, suffered from COVID, and we've also had incredible difficulty with Taswater infrastructure impacting on our bay, the Pittwater region. So how Robin was explaining about the impacts on the land, the water unfortunately gets forgotten in all of this. We have a very diverse and incredibly a unique bay that has endemic sea star populations under McGee's Bridge. We have unique plant and fauna along the shorelines, and all these sort of things can come together if development is not looked after and things are not done in the right way. Now, for me, I'm talking about the road access to get into Barilla Bay. So with the changing of our access, we are faced with serious consequences to our business, which not only impacts our operations, but other businesses that are within our footprint. And they also came on board because of the excellent access that we have for our property. And obviously, particularly over the last 6 years, we've been building our brand and our tourism to attract more people to come to Tasmania, and particularly into Clarence. Barilla Bay Seafoods was built with easy access off the highway. Making it simple for tourists to reach our facility is vitally important. All the businesses on the site rely to a degree on tourism. Ensuring the turn-in remains from the Hobart direction is very important to all of us moving forward. We also have spent a significant amount of money on signage in the front of our property that potentially could be rendered useless if the highway and our access point gets removed. The consultancy period, I quite often said that I needed to have that left-hand access. Unfortunately, they weren't. The only concession they had was extra signage. But unfortunately, the predominant reason was the bike lane coming along our access point there. Obviously, the planning document went into great detail about motor vehicle use, but not too much concerning bike use. So I'd like to see some information regarding that. And probably the best example I have where you can have an impact on your business is obviously the Harrow Garden Centre, where their access of the highway was removed.
Mr Gock, I do have to wind up now, but are you happy to take any questions?
Yes, certainly.
Okay. Are there any questions, please? Alderman James?
Question in relation to how the business will survive. Now, there is a left out, is there not?
Yeah, so I'm well aware that we can't cross 2 lanes of traffic with the new highway, but obviously having that access and tourists coming in find it very difficult to find places, particularly if it's a complex road system that's being envisaged or planned for. And obviously not having that easy access will have a major detrimental effect. I mean, already with the roadworks and all the cars banking up after 3 o'clock, people are choosing not to come into the business because it's just too time consuming, unfortunately.
So, in other words, in order to access your business, you would have to proceed towards Hobart, go around the roundabout and then come back and then have a left in?
Yeah, so there would be a major intersection at where the golf course is, and you have to do a hard left and come back up and in. So for tourists, you'd hope that the signage was exemplary, but unfortunately most of them use Google Maps and equivalents, and unfortunately it doesn't probably give them the right information.
Other questions? Alderman Mulder?
In terms of traffic flow, I take it that the entry will be that left in as you've just described and turning it.
Yep.
Could you just, and that this will be a signalised 4-way junction.
Yep.
Just for clarity, how do you exit?
So you have to go out the same way. So my argument is that we have a left-in turn now. I want that to remain, if possible.
Okay. Other questions? Mr Gock, thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.
Can I call Adrian Payne and Sven Mayer from Department of State Growth to come forward, please, to the microphone?
Hi, good evening all. Thank you for inviting us to this deputation. I'll just do a couple of things to explain the project so you can understand the context. So the project's part of the South East Traffic Solution, which is a $349.5 million package to upgrade Tasman Highway between Hobart Airport and Sorell from single carriageway to 2 lanes in each direction. So that's essentially a duplication, so essentially 4 lanes once completed. This particular project involves duplication of 2.6 kilometres of Tasman Highway between the Hobart Airport interchange, which is under construction now, and the Midway Point Causeway. The Midway Point intersection solution is also currently under construction, which is the 4 lanes plus signalised intersection. This section highway carries 19,000 vehicles per day, which is currently causing significant traffic delays during the peak periods. I guess the theoretical lane capacity is around sort of 12,000 per lane, and we currently have 19,000. The project will benefit everyone in the Tasmanian community by improving traffic efficiency and travel reliability, improving access and safety for the 3 main traffic generators on this section of the highway, which is Pittwater Road, Tasmania Golf Course and the Brewer Bay Oysters, decrease accident rates, which are quite significant due to the large volume of vehicles, and improve the connectivity between Sorell and Clarence regions by the provision of a 2.5 metre separated shared pathway, which will go a long way to providing good connectivity between the Sorell municipality and Clarence municipality. Once we have this project finished, there'll be a connected cycle walkway which will go all the way through, connecting up to the current Clarence cycleways around the Hobart Airport. The design follows the existing corridor and requires a width of 40 metres. To provide this additional width, land has been acquired from the Tasmania Golf Club, Milford property, and we're in negotiations with Hobart International Airport and the Commonwealth of Australia to purchase some of the land around the airport site. The design was chosen following significant extensive community consultation on the best option and the reduced impact on the 4 property owners. It was endorsed by all parties and includes widening on the northern side of the highway for the first 1.2 kilometres to avoid impacts on the Hobart Airport runway, and widening on both sides of the highway to avoid significant impacts on the orchid habitat and the plain area of the Tasmanian Golf Course. We did investigate other options that went up for community consultation, which was widening on the southern alignment only, which had impacts to threatened orchid species, or widening on the northern alignment only, which had significant impacts on the Milford property. As a result, the following additional work is required. We need extensive reworks of the Tasmania Golf Club to redesign the 16th to 17th fairway and driving range. We'll need approval under the EPBC Act for works on the Milford property due to the proximity to the threatened orchid species.
Are you happy to take any questions?
Yeah, that's fine, sure.
Thank you. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm interested in the fencing in the utility zone that's been covered by the officer's report, and it says that the solid nature of the proposed fence along the Tasman Highway course frontage means that the acceptable solution, A1B, is not met. In the acceptable solution, or in the performance criteria, it goes on to say that fencing must contribute positively to the streetscape and not have an unreasonable adverse impact upon the amenity of the land. What is being proposed here is a solid construction. No transparency is considered appropriate given the location and purpose of the fence. Could you just explain why most of the fencing is of a wire transparency nature, and why a small section of the fence is in fact solid, and therefore it seems to be not in conformity with the acceptable solution of the planning scheme.
I believe you might be talking about the section on the Tasmania Golf Course side,
Yes,
is that correct?
That's right. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so this duplication highway was very difficult to fit in the highway corridor. We had constraints on the southern side with the orchid habitat, constraints on the northern side because of the Tasmanian Golf Club. So we tried to fit in as best as possible as we could, and as part of that there is some, we're trying to only realign sections of the golf course that need realignment, and there's a section there that's best suited to not touch and to put up a solid fence, which will help with noise and also prevent golf balls from coming onto the highway.
Okay, thank you. Just worried about the graffiti that may be imposed upon that fence, but nevertheless.
Yeah, they're generally made graffiti proof.
Right.
We'll be re-vegging all around those areas. So.
My other question is in relation to the inclusion zone. Could you just describe the nature of that and as to whether or not it will be part of a 5 metre exclusion zone to the Milford property, or is it to be a temporary nature for the machines and other high-grade equipment to actually use that inclusion zone within the realignment of the boundary along the Tasman Highway?
Yeah, I'm not exactly positive on what we're referring to, but the works will only be occurring within the land that we've acquired. There's no works, no impacts, and no machinery inside property boundaries.
Thank you.
That's the question.
Wendy, did you have a question? Are there any other questions? Oh, Alderman Walker.
Look, thank you for your presentation, and I did drive along the corridor and see the phenomenal activity that's occurring at the midway point side of things just yesterday. We had a presenter today, the proprietor of Barilla Bay, and I am interested in around that aspect of things. And I do understand the challenges of the small corridor that you're working with.
Sure.
But if you could just elaborate as to why it wasn't possible to include that left turn-off for people travelling.
Yeah, so unfortunately, if you widen left to keep the alignment of the road at a suitable design for the 80km design speed for the vehicles, you also have to push out on the other side. So what that means, if we put in a lane to turn directly into Barilla Bay, you would then have further incursions on the southern side, which would impact more of the Hobart Airport land, but also impact some of those directly threatened orchids, which are on the corner of Pittwater Road. So for that reason, we thought the best solution was to have a centralised signalised intersection, which is the safest solution with good signage so that people can see the Barilla Bay oysters as they go past it, stop, turn in a safe direction and then turn back out.
And the actual, I guess, if you like, the bike path in that area is the limiting factor at the end of the day as well? Or?
Well, I'm not sure if you'd be able to do the turning lane instead of the bike path, but you wouldn't certainly be able to do both without impacting the orchids.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no other... Oh, Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have 3 questions, which I think should be fairly short.
Sure.
The first one is, what is the nature of the accidents at those areas? Are they sort of tail enders or side swipes? And are there particular hotspots there at Pittwater Road, the golf club, the current golf club entrance, and also Blomeley Bay?
The majority of accidents in that whole Sir Hobart corridor are rear enders, but that intersection where the Tasmania Golf Club is a hot spot for side swipes because it's very difficult for any vehicles to turn back out towards Hobart. So if you're playing golf for the day and you finish in the afternoon and then you want to get out and you've got the peak hour traffic going the other way, it's almost impossible to go in that direction.
So just how many of these four-way signalised intersections will we have between Sorell and Hobart on the Tasman Highway?
So you have one at Pittwater Road and one at Midway Point.
My last question relates to the consultation. Do you have any comments about the presentation you heard tonight, and no doubt some correspondence that we've all been privy to, which talks about the inadequate consultation with the owner of Milford, and particularly in regards to the description of those of them as just being consulted as our residents rather than a operating commercial enterprise?
Sure. So our consultants for this project, for the whole SETS project, has been Pitt and Sherry, and we've been consulting extensively with the landowners since 2019. Lots and lots of one-on-one conversations. Been dealing with it as a business and a landholder. Unfortunately, I guess if there's impacts to a business, there's not always going to be a negotiated outcome that everyone's happy with. So.
Okay.
May I?
Yes, please.
Can you just explain again for me with Barilla Bay and the Pittwater intersection how that will work?
So if you wanted to turn into Barilla Bay, coming from Hobart, you'd essentially drive along the highway, you'd stop at the traffic lights at Pittwater, and then you'd turn around back into Pittwater. So it'd be a 2-lane in-out road. You'd go into the Pittwater car park and then turn back out.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. We'll now commence the debate and decision-making process. Thank you very much. So, if I could have the motion, please.
You'd like the alternate motion that has been circulated by to all colleagues today, and I guess
if I could just take a second for that, thanks.
More than happy.
Thank you, and thank you, Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I would like to thank all those people for their deputations tonight and to try and give us a better understanding of what's actually happening on what is going to be a very, very, very busy highway. I guess the motion circulated today, my major concerns have been satisfied by the inclusion of F and G with the reasons outlined below. And to just elaborate on that, for those of you that may not have been, and I'm talking about the Milford site in particular now, if you haven't been to the property, so as you pass the Tasmania Golf Club and you the road starts to turn right, there's about 3 big arrows, and then you've got to do a really quick, sharp turn right where you see the letterbox entrance to the actual property. Now, what's being suggested, so I'm envisaging the Pittwater intersection now into Barilla Bay, traffic lights there. So with the Milford property, we're looking at left in, left out only. So that means that if you are driving from Hobart and you are trying to access the Milford property, you would then need to either do some sort of U-turn somewhere or go across the causeway, go around the midway point roundabout to come back to actually enter the property. And if you were leaving the property and wanting to go to Sorrel or Midway Point, then I guess you would have to go back up to the new intersection and turn around and access that, get out that way. So it's left in, left out. And as you heard during our presentations or deputations earlier, this is a working farm that we're talking about. There's a lot of activity. I was there yesterday, a quiet Sunday with Alderman James, and there were that many traffic movements just in the couple of hours that we were actually there. There were people working in the vines, there were families there. I got out and opened the gate for 3 or 4 times for different vehicles that were moving through. There's a lot of deliveries that come to the farm. B doubles. I'm not quite sure how, it's going to be a lot of movement if this is the only way that you can access this property. We're talking about in this motion to actually have some consultation about an alternative access. And again, driving through the property and having a look at what could be available. It would be a compromise for the Laws family, but one I think that they would happily consider from Pittwater Road. And once again, we've got the intersection there, so that should solve any problems there as well. So it really worries me. I think there's a whole lot of safety concerns there. I know, speaking to the family, they're looking at expanding their enterprises with a cellar door. There's lots of eco-friendly walking activity that happens there. We're talking about, one of the 8th oldest working farms in Australia. I think that was correct. And look, there's a whole lot of other things that I could touch on now that I don't think I really need to go into. But this is a busy working farm. I really would struggle with even contemplating that left in, left out only access. So I seek council support. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And of course, the motion that's before the chair is on page 5 of the officer's recommendation, and it obviously goes through a lot of the information that has been covered by the officers, and also too it has addressed many of these matters that are part of the planning scheme and been assessed as part of the performance criteria. And as in addition, there has been a couple of other advice matters that have been included as part of this alternative motion, and that of course covers the consultation between the owner of Milford and the Department of State Growth in relation to the design of an alternative access from Pittwater Road, and invites a suitable permit application to implement such a design. And it's very difficult to try to put a condition in this particular motion because of the very nature of what council has before it, and it's a working document in sense, and therefore the only option we could really try to address the concerns of an alternative access for Milford was in fact what has already been alluded to in the council's report on page 31, and I quote, "It is noted that there are ongoing negotiations between the applicant and the representative with regard to an alternative access to Milford," unquote. And so that is the nature of having that included in there. And also council encourages consultation between the owner of Milford and the Department of State Growth in relation to the provisions of fire protection compliant access for the Tasmanian Fire Service into the Milford Forest. So in other words, there needs to be ongoing dialogue and discussion in relation to these two matters, and that has the reasons why it has been included as advice within the particular proposal. Having said that, there are some, I suppose, shortcomings, and a couple of these have been raised in the meeting tonight, and they are: has there been adequate consultation between the three parties, namely four in fact, the Department of State Growth, the Milford, the Barilla, and also the golf course? And it just seems as though that the golf course is getting a better go at this as far as what fencing and what other provisions are being made in relation to what acquisition of property on the northern side of the highway, as distinct from how much access or lack thereof in relation to the Barilla enterprise. And I hope that may be something that could be worked out or discussed in relation to this, because it just seems as though hearing the proprietor or the owners of Barilla, that really their business may in fact suffer if something is not done, and it would have thought that there may be some option for, and in ongoing discussions and consultation, that their business can be a viable one if in fact there can be some access to it. But in conclusion, Mr Mayor, I believe that these couple of matters that have been incorporated within the motion are good ones. They're advice and not in any way determine the nature of what is being proposed by the officers. I seek council support.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I believe that a realignment of this highway is actually required, compared to the to what is proposed before us. Midway Point is a signalised T-junction on the highway, and they are fairly rare when you talk about major road corridors. A four-way T-junction has about triple the traffic conflicts of a signalised T-junction. And then you notice that the nature of the accidents in the area is rear-enders, which are caused, no doubt, by the traffic banking up behind the roundabout, the current roundabout. Once we get rid of that, we will have a signalised T-junction where cars will be required to stop at a T-junction, and I'm not too sure, if you look at the sight lines, that they won't have the same problem that we are trying to get rid of. I believe that greater use of Gulf land and greater use of the airport land would enable some of the access and the egress issues to be addressed potentially, and I would like to see a lot more work done in relation to Pittwater Road, connecting Pittwater Road to Alderman Drive, and Barilla and the Tas Golf accesses to Kennedy Drive, which would avoid having a signalised junction or this sort of traffic conflict there at all. At the same time, the realignment, using more airport land and a little more Gulf land, would actually get rid of some of the environmental issues related to some very significant and small patches of remnant endangered flora and fauna habitat. So, Mr Mayor, I won't be supporting this motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Walker, and then Alderman Pearce.
Look, the highway upgrade is necessary. We've had the deputation today from DSG explaining the current volumes, current capacity. We also note the works currently being undertaken and well advanced at Midway Point. And I am sympathetic to the challenges and constraints faced by the road designers and consultants as they tried to make their way through to get a process that would see widening in this area. It has been a big challenge. One of my biggest bugaboos in local government, and indeed in state government, federal even, is the somewhat systemic nonchalance when it comes to compulsory acquisition of land. In liberal democratic free societies, property rights is one of the core fundamentals that makes things function, along with rule of law. And I look at this situation, and some land will need to be required. So we can go to the nuances of which bits, but I think, despite my feelings, I've got to understand that when it comes to things like highways and hospitals, key community infrastructure, that this is something that's sometimes required. As I said, the project was a profound challenge to try and make it work, and they've gone ahead, and this is where we've got to. But I'm not going to let it go without notice that I'm disappointed that at the meeting of the 17th of June 2019, this council, when first sort of this came before us in its early visionary status, the motion that the council put back to the state government, if you like, to sort of say where we thought things were at, included the point that council does not support the loss of land at the Tasmanian Golf Club for the purpose of road widening and access. That was what was put. There was no similar concerns raised for the property on the other side, and I was the only alderman that didn't support that motion. So in some ways, if you're the designer and it's constrained, that was the message that initially came from this council in 2019. So perhaps it's unsurprising to see the heavy lifting, if you like, as far as things go, being put onto Milford rather than the golf club. But I will be supporting this motion, and I do note that it has been improved with the alternates put there. But I'm not sure that it was the optimal way forward, but it was, I guess, the directions that sort of got things under the path. So I would encourage fellow aldermen to support the motion
and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, a bit like Alderman Walker there, at some stage I looked at this and I thought, geez, you know, I don't even know if I could support it as such. And I know that's silly because I know the highway upgrade is really needed, but some of the representations tonight really hit a sore point with me because being in business, I know how things like this can affect business. And driving down there to have a look, I could really understand that. I really can. And I do thank Alderman Kennedy and Alderman James for putting the alternative motion up because I think it gives us some glimmer of hope. There's a couple of things I would like to say, and I just say I notice in this report there's a lot of Taswater stuff, geez there isn't, and I only hope that Taswater get it right because I know they've got a lot of work to do, and I really do. Now, one of the things I raise in page 5 and point 5 in the recommendation, because again, this could come back on us. For purposes of protecting council stormwater systems, all stormwater runoff from impervious surfaces within the site must be treated and discharged using water-sensitive urban design principles to achieve stormwater quality, etc., etc. Now, look, I just hope that's true because in here, which surprised me a little, the proposed highway upgrade work increases the impervious surface area. Now, it's saying that once it's done all the modelling, the rate of discharge remains the same, which, geez, I hope they got that right too. I hope they got that right too, because that's going to come back on this council.
Thank you, Alderman Blomeley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and we all know this upgrade of the highway needs to occur. Now, we heard tonight 90,000 vehicle movements per day. We all know how busy it is. In fact, this council has been at the forefront of calling for upgrades to infrastructure throughout our city, but in particular that stretch of road as Sorrel and Tasman councils increase in popularity and people coming into town. And it's good to see that the state government is putting some money here in southern Tasmania. It's good to see some investment in infrastructure. However, as we heard tonight, and as many of us would be aware from correspondence we've received from some of the representatives, Milford's a property with a 192-year history. What a proud history. And when one looks at the heritage, ecological and agricultural benefits or contribution of that particular property, you've really got to stop and balance that against the transport solution that we're being presented with this evening. I think the proposed amendment is very sound, and I thank Alderman Kennedy and Alderman James for the work that they've done here, because I think that the least we can do for the Lewis family is ensure that the Department of State Growth is encouraged to consult with them and other affected users as well. We heard from Brillo Bay Oysters here this evening. We've got to get this right. This is a one-in-generation opportunity. We heard it's sort of circa $400 million of taxpayers' money here. And I think that recognising that we need an upgrade to this vital piece of infrastructure, it is important that we do it properly. And I am hopeful, as I'm sure that we all are, that with more consultation between the builders of the infrastructure, the state government, and the affected property, that we might get a better outcome. So, Mr Mayor, with those few words, I am very happy to support this amendment this evening.
Thank you. Alderman Warren.
Mr Mayor, at a time when we should be planting more trees and trying to get cars off the road, this government seems intent on doing exactly the opposite. There's been a lot said about the number of cars using this road, a lot of single occupant cars. With a bit of vision, we could have had a proper public transport solution from Sorrel to Hobart that could be operating now without the disruption of the major roadworks. But as my fellow aldermen have said, this is the motion that's before us. I do regret the vote of June 2019, which Alderman Walker has drawn our attention to. After the roadworks started in this area, I was contacted by a number of very distressed citizens once they saw the destruction of the trees and the loss of habitat, and I know that we're going to be faced with that again through this extension of the road. But it's tempting to say the damage is already done. We can't have a 4-lane stopping halfway and then going to 2 lanes, but I still think there are better solutions, and it would have been nice to have a bit more vision on this. I do appreciate the amendments that will address some of the concerns of the businesses, which are both really important businesses and something that we should be celebrating and be proud of and to be promoting. So again, the government makes all the noises about protecting biodiversity and threatened species and heritage, conservation and cultural values for the First Nations people until they want to build something. And then all of that goes out the window, and I was particularly struck by this quote here that says, loss of vegetation is a regrettable but necessary outcome of widening the highway to 4 lanes. Regrettable, very regrettable. I would have liked to have seen greater vision on this, but I thank the mover and the seconder for at least coming up with something which encourages us to support what could be landmark businesses in the Clarence municipality.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you very much. Not to be a pedant, but A4 talks about the Tasman Golf Club. It's the Tasmanian Golf Club.
I'm sorry?
We just need to fix where it says Tasman Golf Club in A4. It says Tasmanian Golf Club. But anyway, just to avoid any confusion on that front.
Thank you for that.
Clark's correct.
Yeah, sort of a bit of a here we go again. I remember we did the just down the highway over Zoom a bit over a year ago, and there was some unease about some of the consultation issues then, and reluctantly went ahead and supported it. Here we have the alternative motion, which I'm thankful for, which again at least puts in writing that this consultation is encouraged. And I take the point about if the point of this highway is to bust congestion, it seems to make no sense to be sending the traffic referred to all the way to the midway point and back when it doesn't need to be. So with that in mind, also talking about the fact that we sort of are where we are, aren't we? We've got 4 lanes here, 4 lanes here. What's a no vote doing tonight, I suppose? I'm really disappointed with the way that things have panned out around particularly what we heard about Barilla Bay, but I honestly don't know what we can do about it. Like, we sort of got a gun to our head a bit on that one, it feels like to me. The scrapping of this motion, I don't think has an end result where that problem is solved. We are where we are because of the plans of DSG, as we heard. You know, and again, I talk about, has there been adequate consultation? We had the promises of consultation a year ago. I hope they're a bit more thorough this time. You know, and I think given the sort of how constrained the site is and how constrained we are, I think the alternative motion is about as much bend as we can get. So with that in mind, it has my support because I think it's as far as we can push it.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right of reply, Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to thank my colleagues for their contributions tonight, and I seek council's support. Thank you.
Thank you. So the motion before the Chair is the officer's recommendation with the 2 additional clauses F and G, and also picking up the correction on recommendation A4 to ensure the Tasmanian Golf Club. With that, all those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Thank you. That concludes our business for this evening's special meeting.